What are you doing?
Dance off, bro!
Welcome, Gothamites, to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City and now the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Dr. Drea Letamendi. We are talking about Guardians of the Galaxy, which in the last episode you expressed a significant amount of interest in and excitement for talking about. What is it that you love about this movie going in?
This is probably my top three as
Really?
far as Marvel movies go.
Okay.
This is a group of misfits. These are this is a ragtag team of people who have clear problems, who have deficits, who are just, they just don't fit in. They don't belong. They are struggling. But they just have so much character and so much psychological depth that they actually are some of the most relatable figures in the MCU. And I think that's a nice escape or relief from the constant pressures of these Captain Americas and these Supermans and these characters that in order to find their weaknesses or vulnerabilities, you really have to have this like dissertation on it. These folks are have observable, clear problems. Mm-hmm. And in fact, what I really, really love about the film is that despite their vulnerabilities and even some of their deficits, there's no expectation that those parts of their characters are resolved at the end of the film. That it's not as if all of them are psychologically healthy and, quote, cured by the end of the film. And I think that's fairly realistic, but also, again, very relatable.
And despite all their deficits, they manage to balance one another pretty well. They still make for a very competent superhero team despite these quote-unquote issues. What did you know about Guardians of the Galaxy going into the movie the first time you saw it in, 2014?
Not very much. This isn't these stories aren't necessarily the most mainstream. I probably know about a couple of characters, but I didn't read Marvel comics as a kid.
Yeah. To be honest, I read very little. I knew more about certain characters within these books through other comics where they would make sort of guest appearances, very rarely ever as the Guardians of the Galaxy. It would not be a surprise to find out that this incarnation of Guardians was not the original lineup of the Guardians of the Galaxy. And I would say that I was pretty surprised when I first heard the news that Marvel was going to put a Guardians of the Galaxy movie into their lineup, because up to this point, we'd always dealt with Captain America, Thor, Iron Man, the Incredible Hulk, for the most part. And you're really dealing with, in those cases, when these movies first came out, and I think we even talked about it when we first talked about the origin of the MCU with Iron Man, these were B-tiered characters. We think of them now as being like the upper echelon of Marvel Comics, but these were B-tiered characters. The A-tiered characters had all gone to other studios. This is what was left. And when I say other, the top tier characters, I'm talking about Spider-Man, which went to Sony, the X-Men, which went to Fox.
Fantastic Four.
You've got those characters that have all gone to other places. So they went with what they had left. They were essentially scraping the barrel by the time they got to Guardians of the Galaxy, as far as I was concerned. And very incorrectly, luckily, I assumed this was going to be their first major flop. Like, this is the first mistake in their lineup.
Wow.
Like who cares about Guardians of the Galaxy? The genius was that they hired James Gunn to write and direct this movie. And this movie has James Gunn written all over it. So I really think he took what could have easily been a bomb and turned it into gold, as far as I'm concerned, especially seeing as how you're willing to put it up in your top 3 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe so far. So, yeah, it's a wonderful movie, and I'm really looking forward to talking about it with you. I think there's really one thing that we can do is we got to start with Peter Quill, right? We got to start with Star-Lord, because he really starts the movie out as we see a young boy in the 80s who is losing his mother to presumably cancer, surrounded by loving but kind of stern family. He's clearly kind of an outcast in the family situation. He is terrified of being with his mother as she is dying. You know, what child wants to watch that happen? What child wants to reach out and touch her hand? It's got to be devastating for her. The last thing she wanted before she died was to hold hands with her son, her only son. And then we fast forward a little bit to Peter Quill as an adult, bit of a man-child.
You forgot that he was kidnapped.
Kidnapped.
He was kidnapped.
I guess it's true.
He's dealing with this huge traumatic loss. He wanders out.
But I mean, he was going to be raised by his grandfather.
Sure. No, he had a loving family that was taking him in.
Yeah. I don't know if they were understanding.
Sure. He still seemed to be somewhat adrift, but this child was kidnapped.
Yeah.
He was surprised by a UFO that came down and whisked him away into space. Mm-hmm. So that alone, coupled with the loss of his mother, was a tremendous traumatic experience.
And when you talk about the fact that this was a ship that was basically led by Yondu, that's an even more traumatic experience right there. I mean, we'll talk about Yondu, but yeah, then we fast forward to Peter as an adult, as a bit of a man-child. He's wandering a dark, mysterious, sort of stormy planet. He comes across an orb that's being protected, presumably by a group of people, or they also want the same orb. We're not sure their deal just yet. And then gets into a little bit of a scuffle with them and gets away. We learn that he's been raised by this group of Ravagers. They are criminals. They're thieves and proud of it. They live on the sort of on the outskirts of the law. Scoundrels. They're Han Solos. They're all Han Solos.
All of them. And he's acculturated into that. He learns like, you know, to be streetwise.
Yeah.
He learns how to protect himself. He's very autonomous. Certainly is very skillful in getting out of situations. He's learned how to do that.
Yeah.
But he is very, I guess the most positive way to say this is goal oriented, but it's really this, he is centered on gains, on profit, on how do I sort of, game the system because that's my lot in life.
He is very confident when it comes to his wit. He believes he can outsmart anyone, and possibly that could be because he's been surrounded by these other not so intelligent Ravagers his entire life. So he might easily be able to at least talk his way out of any situation with them.
Well, and look, like, he's not my favorite Guardian, but I will say that growing up with other species, other humanoids out in the galaxy may have been quite an interesting experience. Being the only human boy in this community and then growing up to be the only human. And what does that mean as far as his sense of belongingness? Does he feel isolated? Does he feel lonely? does he trust other people? And the trust issue is incredibly important because I believe that he's essentially raised not to trust anybody outside of the group.
Yeah, I would agree with that. His coping mechanism seems to be a Walkman, a Sony Walkman with a mixtape that his mother had made for him of all of her favorite songs from the 70s, mostly sort of 70s rock, funk, and he's been listening to it for 30 years.
You know, for the sake of what is considered or at least what I would consider the heart of this film, it's his connection to a relationship that was very important to him, this bond that he had, even though it was lost when he was a child, and even though he's much, much older, this bond that he had with his initial caregiver. And that bond was characterized by somebody who was loving and compassionate, and presumably in a way that was unconditional, which he hasn't really experienced in this transactional world that he's in. What are you going to do for me?
Right.
And so everything is strings attached. He doesn't have... This tape is pure, right? And that's really what he's missing.
I do want to ask you about the music and the cassette tape, not the physics of the cassette tape itself, but I want to ask you about the importance of music as a whole. Our good friend Dr. Ali Mattu even wrote an article in 2014 when this movie came out, and he talks a little bit about the importance of music when it comes to mood and psychology. Give us your thoughts on that. What is this music doing simply besides reminding him of his mother? It seems to be his personal soundtrack beyond that.
Well, music is so important to our sense of self. It helps us to build self-awareness. It helps us to build understanding about other people. It's so interesting that it's a Walkman, right? So he's privately listening to these songs. I like what you said. This is the soundtrack of his personhood. That's how I would describe it. It gives him confidence. It gives him courage. It gives him this connection, like we talked about, to somebody that knows him, somebody that understands him, that gets him.
His ship, by the way, does have a cassette player as well.
Oh, that's right.
So that he can also load
play
it
in his ship.
Yeah.
And so the science behind this is also really fascinating. And think about, if I were to play a song that you maybe listened to when you were an adolescent or a teen, it will bring back similar emotions and feelings. It'll bring back maybe even some of the visceral physical experiences that will take you back to that time. Just like other senses, we've talked about how, for instance, sense of smell is such an important trigger for experiences. Not in a bad way necessarily, but in a very holistic way. Listening to music can carry that same neurobiological connection and can essentially bring back those memories, or at least flood the brain with some of the same images, ideas, and sensations that you had when you were introduced to that music or when you played that music often. So it's important.
And we've talked about the importance of like walk-up songs. We've talked about, what would you walk up to an event or
hype songs,
or like a hype song.
Yeah, for sure.
We've talked about that because these are songs that also give you confidence in some way. For you, I'm trying to remember which one it was. For me, it was like a Hans Zimmer, Gladiator song. But which one did you walk out to?
I actually have a lot of hype songs.
Oh, you do?
I may have shared.
But you listen, you do a lot of Peloton.
Could be hype, AC/DC song. Bobby Brown's My Prerogative is
really?
a potential hype song.
That's a hype song for you? Okay.
If I'm feeling pretty sassy that day.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. So I get the sense that this is also happening to Peter, that, in those times where he's feeling particularly funky or particularly sassy, he'll go to certain songs most likely. And that'll, like I said, it's the soundtrack.
It can, those beats, those lyrics, the message can give you confidence and courage, can make you feel proactive, that you can accomplish the thing that you're out there to achieve. I absolutely love his strategy with the music, and I love that it's also connected to something that is fundamentally meaningful to who he thinks he is. Because as we'll talk about, there's a lot of challenges here with these specific individuals and their struggle with their sense of self and their sense of relationships.
One thing I do appreciate, and I'll get off the Walkman here in a second, but one thing I do appreciate is that everyone in the galaxy seems to not only know what it is, but also how to work it. There's a moment when when Drax is complimenting him and saying that he's brave for having risked his life and then flew out into space and caught up with the ship as they were leaving, and then asks what he risked his life for. And then he shows him the Walkman and he holds it and says, "You're an idiot." This is nothing. Why would you go back for this? Whereas you would think that aliens would be like, this must be something really important or really powerful. But he just looks at this piece of plastic and says, "You're an idiot." But I do appreciate there's the guard that takes the Walkman from him. And when Peter goes back to his sort of storage locker that has all of his artifacts, he realizes it's not in there, and there's only one person who must have it. It's got to be that guard. And he goes, and the guard not only has it, he is currently listening to it when Peter shows up and physically removes it. But I appreciate that guard appreciates the music, because you see him like bobbing his head. He gets it. He's like, "Oh yeah, this is a
bop."
Yeah, this is a real banger. Well, let's talk about Peter then. As you said, each person has their own thing. Well, what is his thing?
You said it when Drax said, "You're an idiot." Like
that's his thing. He's an idiot.
And again, I'm not trying to put down these characters or criticize these characters, but saying that this is a band of superheroes that subverts the sort of pre-existing formula of the metas, the extras, the heroes, the supers, having all of these fantastic abilities. This is a group that we, if anything, are learning about their deficits. We're sort of learning about what they're struggling with. And I hate even calling them deficits, because they're really quirks and characteristics that make them who they are.
Right.
But in fact, they are emotional, neurological, and communication related features that prevent them from having solid, healthy relationships, that keep them on destructive paths. So that's sort of where I feel, this film is valuable, that there's something really important about this story. Yes, these are the losers and the idiots as named by other characters in the movie. They are the underperformers, the underachievers, not exactly the star members of their communities. And I think it's helpful to better understand what is it that gives them value. Where do they in their quirky ways, or how do they in their quirky ways find meaning and purpose for themselves? And, obviously as a psychologist, I find it important to understand how they got there. That Quill had to make it on his own, even when he was adopted by this community of bandits, that he still sort of had to be a self-sufficient person. And what that means, as I say, well, he's called an idiot, is that he's not really paying attention to other people's needs.
Yeah.
He really wasn't raised to pay attention to other people's needs. And in fact, he then is a very closed off person. He's not really attainable, and he sort of becomes that figure of as other characters notice, a figure, a person who is out for themselves and uncaring about the needs of others.
In an interview, Chris Pratt said he had a hard time as a kid talking about Peter. And now he goes around space, making out with hot alien girls and just being a rogue and a bit of a jerk. And through teaming up with these guys, finds a higher purpose for himself.
Yeah.
So he seems to be, you two seem to be simpatico on that.
Well, don't say that too much about me and Chris Pratt.
Well, okay. Yeah. So then let's move on to one of the characters he meets next, Gamora. Gamora, who is the daughter of the Mad Titan Thanos. We know already that Thanos is in search of the Infinity Stones. We don't fully understand why yet, because we don't know exactly what they all do. But Gamora is one of his, shall we say, adopted daughters.
She is, yeah.
I don't know if it's official. He just kind of took her. Talk about kidnapping. He just kind of took her.
Well, he murdered,
wiped out half the population of her planet.
He murdered like most of her people and then kidnapped her as well.
Half of her people, but then kidnapped her as well.
But her family
all gone.
Yes, right. So her immediate family was lost to Thanos's cruel.
Yeah. And for
methods.
For others, we will see this scene in a later movie, but she does specifically tell her story in this movie. So even though we're not normally allowed to talk about things in the future, she does talk about it. It's fair game. But she has a sister as well. We'll talk about her a little bit. But right now we are learning that Gamora has never fully adapted to her new father and new lifestyle of being a warrior. She does not agree with him, and she in fact hates him with every fiber of her being. And now she realizes that this is her opportunity to get out of, quote unquote, the family business. But she does appear to be, of the two sisters, she is the perfect sister. She is the perfect daughter to Thanos. He certainly looks at her as like his potential successor one day down the line. Let's talk about Gamora, Drea. Brilliantly performed, by the way, by Zoe Saldana. What is your take on Gamora?
Well, given what we described as far as her origins, she's rightfully on guard around a lot of people. She has to be very protective. She's likely not going to seek emotional closeness, social belongingness. She's, in some ways similar to Quill. She had to learn to be very self-protective and self-efficient.
I imagine she also had to turn off any sort of emotion or empathy toward others because her job given to her by her father was that of assassin. I mean, I can only imagine that to kill a person must do a significant amount to a human being, emotionally, mentally. There has to be stress involved with that, usually, maybe not always, but usually. And this is a character who has now had to live her life, whether she liked it or not, killing lots of people and being associated with Thanos, whether she wanted to be associated with Thanos or not.
You have the audio from the prison.
I do.
That tells us she is not liked in the universe, that just by association and by committing some of these atrocities in alignment with Thanos.
Yeah, let's take a listen.
She's gotten such a reputation.
Let's take a listen to that audio right here.
You first! You first! Coming for you first of all! Like I said, she's got a rep. A lot of prisoners here have lost their families to Ronan and his goons. She'll last a day, tops.
The guards will protect her, right?
And they're here to stop us from getting out. They don't care what we do to each other inside.
Whatever nightmares knows the future holds are dreams compared to what's behind me.
So, obviously that can be hurtful to have just this amount of hatred be directed at you in such vile comments. And there's an element there of, at least for me, wondering how much she internalizes that. Does she dislike herself? Does she find little value in her life? Is she solely evaluated by her fierceness, right? Her ability to destroy, her qualities that are really just central to an assassin, and that's somewhat of a tragedy.
Yeah. We heard there during that audio the voice of Drax the Destroyer, played by Dave Bautista. I want to talk about Drax a little bit. This was a character who was spoken about at great length when the movie came out. A lot of people actually applauded Marvel for creating a central character that was clearly on the autism spectrum. Drea, would you talk about that? What signs are those people seeing and applauding? And would you say that Drax's entire population, entire species is this way? He's not unique to this species.
Well, yeah, and I don't know if there's a difference with the comic book origin and the movie origin, because we still know very little. Even after a couple movies, we don't know a ton about Drax.
Yeah, we know about his family, his immediate family, but yeah.
And we know that Thanos had murdered his family.
Well, the Ronan the Accuser had murdered Drax's family.
Right. And what we know is that this is a man, this is a humanoid who doesn't have access to abstract thinking, to imagination. He's very, very direct. He's very literal. He says exactly what is on his mind, what he thinks, what he feels. And he has little connection to how his expressions impact others. There's a little bit of a disconnection, especially in terms of communication skills around how his expressions have an impact on others. Yeah. So there's sort of that that feature that I think a lot of people can relate to. In the comics, he's sort of he's been reincarnated. He was a human, and then he sort of got placed into this body and lost his sense of imagination. But in the film, which I sort of like better, this is his authentic self, that he was made this way. He was born this way. He has this different way of brain functioning.
Also, looking at an interview with Dave Bautista, he said that there was a lot of comic relief to Drax, but that the character wasn't aware of it.
Oh, that's so lovely.
Yeah.
Meaning that, and this walks a fine line, right? You don't want to make fun of the character. You don't want us laughing at him in a demeaning manner. Again, because many people look to this character as one that may represent communities or people who have some similar neurodiverse features, right? Not being more detail oriented, not having a big picture mindset, being very literal and direct. It's important to note Drax is very intelligent. He has an extensive vocabulary. His ability to problem solve is intact. He's quite able to generate solutions. He's not unintelligent. He's not, and I wouldn't even say he has these social deficits. It is the way in which his mind works. It is, and how many would say folks who have ADHD or who are on the autism spectrum may think or operate in terms of their cognitive abilities. And that isn't necessarily a disability. That's simply a different way of thinking about the world and a different way of communicating. And what's troubling too is that there are ways in which he inadvertently offends his friends by being literal, saying that Rocket is vermin. He can be quite offensive, not necessarily with the intent to hurt or harm, but maybe to just make an observation. And in some cases, he is approaching humor. He does. He is laughing at sometimes. He's smiling. He is emotionally connected, and he enjoys life. So he is actually he's dynamic.
But he's
not a one-note character.
He doesn't necessarily know when the humor is appropriate, though. He doesn't necessarily know that what he is laughing at is not always funny.
Right. Right. And, when I worked with adults who struggle with communication skills, and especially who have some level of autism, what we used to term high-functioning autism, there would be many, many conversations with these clients around what is humorous to them and what signals and clues do they need to look at to understand when other people are attempting at jokes, at humor. What are the social cues that tell them somebody was actually being sarcastic or using hyperbole or using metaphor, which are very, very difficult ideas for people on the autism spectrum. And even things that you can understand they would avoid. Why bother abstracting? Why use hyperbole? Why not just say the literal thing you're trying to say? Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a lot of that in Drax, right? Mm-hmm. This sense of being quite fine, quite comfortable with who he is, and not seeing himself as someone with a deficit.
One of the first instances that we are introduced to is the moment someone says that something went over his head. And I've got the audio of that right here. Here you go.
Metaphors are gonna go over his head.
Nothing goes over my head. My reflexes are too fast. I would catch it.
I'm gonna die surrounded by the biggest idiots in the galaxy.
This is also a character who lost his whole family.
Can I say, and this is where I think the writing is valuable to us and is not offensive, because although we laugh because it is humorous that he's basically saying he's smarter than that
quicker and stronger.
He's talking about his strengths, right? All his positive features. What he also does is diffuse the comment or the approach that another person has. He sort of takes agency to state how he sees the world. And so, again, at least from my perspective, this isn't the humor isn't about making fun of Drax. It's sort of celebrating Drax.
Yeah. This is a character who, like everyone else so far, has lost their family. As we mentioned, Gamora's entire family is wiped out by Thanos. Peter's entire family, for all intents and purposes, his mother is dead by now. He's never known his father. His father is someone that his mom referred to as an angel. We're going to learn more about that later. Mm-hmm. And Ronan the Accuser has murdered Drax's family, his wife and child. And now he is full of rage and this overwhelming desire to kill Ronan the Accuser. I want to talk about a couple of the characters that got us to Drax, to the prison, and that is Rocket and Groot. Now, you have a particular affinity for Rocket. Let's talk about this character. Rocket is a raccoon visually. He's a raccoon visually.
Okay.
We would know him as a raccoon. He walks on two legs. His hind legs, uses his front legs as one would their arms, and to carry massive weapons of just unbelievable destructive power. And he just gets off on this idea of catching. He's definitely a bounty hunter. He's into catching people, killing them if need be, collecting the bounties. That's what he's doing when he's going after Quill. This is a character who was experimented on.
Yeah.
He's basically built.
He is a creature whose origins are, he has intergalactic origins, right, from some other planet where there were other creatures like him. And like many of his friends here, he was victimized. He was kidnapped or raccoon napped, creature napped. He was taken and tortured, experimented on, and he has these cybernetic implants. He's hyper intelligent. He's language capable. He looks to us like a raccoon, but has an incredible amount of abilities, especially I'd say in as a weapons tactician engineer. Like he
and
is
a mechanic.
Yeah. So he has all these. He's high functioning in all these areas. In fact, a super genius, and there is his purpose. He is so effective in what he does because of his uniqueness and his, I'd say, like his sense of victimization. He's a survivor of all these terrible things that actually then led to who he is. He wouldn't be this way if it weren't for what happened to him. He has a very complicated relationship with himself.
Yeah.
So there's a tremendous amount of internal self-hatred, pain, post-traumatic, self-hating qualities. And we see that in how he interacts with other people. He's incredibly, I wouldn't even say defensive, I'd say offensive. Like he is just on guard all the time and unwilling to be close to anybody, with the exception of Groot, of course, who we'll talk about.
Yeah. James Gunn mentioned that he desperately wanted the character to not be a cartoon character. So he worked with live raccoons in order to get the feel for what these animals were and how they responded to things. And he actually was quoted as saying, "It's not Bugs Bunny in the middle of the Avengers. It's a real, little, somewhat mangled beast that's alone. There's no one else in the universe quite like him. He's been created by these guys to be a mean-ass fighting machine." And we see that a lot throughout the course of the movie, not just the mean-ass fighting machine part, but the fact that he's alone. Even with Groot, this is a character who is alone. Groot is the extent of his family up until the point that he meets Peter and Gamora and Drax. And so it's actually what makes one of the more touching moments later so incredibly touching. This character that has built up walls to the degree that he can be triggered at the slightest little thing, whether it's an insult or a fact. Peter Quill calls him a raccoon. For all intents and purposes, for Peter, he is a raccoon. But Rocket gets so offended, and partially because he doesn't know the word. He doesn't know what it means, and he's not happy with being called one.
Right.
And
so can you see how there's this opposites thing going? There's this duality, both hating oneself and also this aggrandizing kind of sense of self. No one else is like me. I'm the best at what I do. And then also this self-hatred, the loneliness, the sadness, can't really relate to anybody. Even Groot, who is very, and I know this is going to sound bold here, but Groot is probably more emotionally wise and understanding and compassionate. it's more of a symbiosis where Rocket is the intelligent person or being in the relationship, and Groot is the compassionate, emotionally wise person.
Yeah. Speaking of Groot, James Gunn said, all the Guardians start out the movie as bastards, except Groot. He's an innocent. He's 100% deadly and 100% sweet. He's caught up in Rocket's life, really. And so I think that is an incredibly insightful look at this character who can literally only say 3 words. His entire speech is 3 words, technically 4, we find out later, but it's 3 words. I am Groot, in that order. And it means everything that he ever wants to say. And really one of the only people, if not the only person who can understand him, is Rocket. But he nails it. This idea that Groot is a child in many ways. And yet you also nail it. He is the most emotionally wise of the bunch. I don't know if there's a whole lot more that can be said about Groot, but his Spock-like sacrifice at the end of the movie is really what I think is one of the most emotional scenes that I think I've seen in any of the MCU movies, especially when you get Rocket's reaction to losing the only person he's ever really known as a member of his family.
Yeah, and I think if you have it, we should play the part of Groot's self-sacrifice that helps us get it. Like
when we introduce the 4th word?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
The 4th word in his vocabulary?
Right.
Yeah, I do have it. Here you go. Take a listen.
No, Groot. You can't. You'll die. Why are you doing this? Why?
We are Groot.
And this is why I said he's the most emotionally intelligent. I don't mean that he has the biggest vocabulary, right? I mean that he has an ability to process his own emotions and understand the emotions of others. He knows when to, even this huge gesture, right? It's an understanding of other people and their needs and their emotions. He also does something here which is pretty amazing. He is seeing past his own sense of self. He's saying, you are an extension of me and I'm an extension of you. We are not separated by our bodies. And so this is quite an emotional and existential gesture. Without you, I don't exist.
Yeah.
And so this literal extension of his body to save everybody just has that sense of, or gives us that understanding of how he sees relationships and how there are fewer boundaries. The emotional connection doesn't have the parameters that the other characters hold. And he ends up, saving them with this gesture that seems to him very natural and intuitive. Why would I do anything else? This is what I can do to protect you, and it's in my nature to do this. So it's very heartfelt. I mean, watching it again, I couldn't help but tear up. It's a very, very good scene.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about our villain of this film, Ronan the Accuser, played by Lee Pace. This is a Kree zealot. For the sake of completion, I guess we should talk a little bit about this character, but he's pretty straightforward as this villain character who believes that he's trying to retrieve this orb for Thanos. He has no idea that there's an Infinity Stone inside of it. Once he finds out, he decides to betray Thanos and use the Infinity Stone himself. There really isn't a whole lot, I would say, that could be said about him, except that he is a religious zealot. He believes, even more so than most of the other Kree at this point, that life should be a certain way, the Kree should be a certain way. And so, I don't know if you have anything really to add.
I mean, other than that he serves as that mechanism.
Yeah.
That the other characters do develop toward a better understanding of despite all these things that make them imperfect, that make them so flawed, that actually make them pretty destructive. All of them. Like it blurs the lines. I mean, they are villains too in their world. This villain, however, has the intent of, I think the intent of destruction and harm that gives them pause, that has that interpersonal, or, what we would consider like that is more of a personal or interpersonal harm to me. The fact that you victimized me through my loved ones. And that sense, that aftermath, that sense of loss, there's nothing to compare to that. And I think that builds everybody's interest in essentially being in conflict with Ronan.
Yeah. And Ronan really is the one thing that he wants is to destroy Xandar, which we know as the capital of the Nova Corps. He has a personal vendetta against this particular planet, the Nova Corps and Xandar. And in fact, what he really wants is the agreement is that he will get Thanos the orb, and Thanos will destroy Xandar once he has it.
Right.
Once he finds out that having the orb himself would allow him the opportunity to do it, that's when he decides to do it himself. And we also learn the destructive power of the stones, that most people can't hold one themselves. They're not powerful enough to hold one themselves. We see that someone tries to hold one and she is immediately disintegrated. Then we see that doesn't happen to Ronan. He is capable of holding it. And he becomes extremely powerful because he's got the Power Stone. Likewise,
so this is the Power Stone.
Correct. Likewise, Peter Quill also takes hold of the Power Stone, and only because, and unlike her, he is not disintegrated immediately. He is able to actually hold the power back.
His body can tolerate whatever is toxic in this Power Stone. Even
more so when each member of the Guardians join hands with him in order to carry the brunt of the load. And I can only imagine what those other characters are feeling, because they don't know what we will eventually find out about Peter's DNA makeup. There's a reason he can hold on to it for as long as he did. But that brings me to what I really think this entire movie is about, which is family. We have learned what the power of family means. We have learned that each one of these characters individually has no family. It's only when they get together that they have made their own.
I mean, I'm agreeing with you and would say it's not only that they have no family, it's that their origin family was disrupted or harmed them, or they were separated from them. So this sense of familial loss, a deep kind of, almost a wound, right? Kind of related to family that led them to each kind of be on their own and have a willingness to be out there in space and not necessarily have family. Sort of giving up on family is what they knew before.
Yeah.
And I'd even add that because of those experiences, and with Drax a little bit because of his of who he is inherently, they all have very, very poor skills around interpersonal effectiveness. So what becomes really important then is how to sustain these relationships, right?
Yeah.
You've heard that song, Now That We Found Love, What Are We Gonna Do? Mm-hmm. So kind of like that. Like you have to, you can't go back to your old ways, right? The thing that's really interesting about these characters is that they were not very good at relating to people.
Right.
And that's called interpersonal effectiveness, our ability to express our needs, our ability to understand other people's needs, our ability to communicate clearly and with respect to our own selves as well as respect to other people. So I say that because I think all of us could use some better skills around interpersonal effectiveness.
Yeah.
And without those fancy words, we could simply say, like, how do we get along? How do we get along better? And that could be especially important for people who have trouble with maintaining good relationships.
Okay.
You know, why do I keep getting hurt?
Yeah.
Why are people offended by me? Why do I struggle with wanting to be alone, but then wanting to be with other people? Just that sense of having good boundaries and healthy communication and getting along. Mm-hmm. So this is a human thing. This is not necessarily only for people who struggle with mental health problems. But there is a therapy called, broadly speaking, dialectical behavioral therapy that we've actually talked about on the show that does include specific strategies around interpersonal effectiveness.
Right.
You know, again, how to be really good at expressing our needs and getting what we want and trying not to get hurt, right? Because there are many characters, let's just focus on one. So obviously I'm going to pick Rocket Raccoon since he's my favorite. Okay. And I'm going to just explain one of the strategies. And the thing about DBT is that the developer really relies on acronyms for some of these coping strategies. And the reason for that is that, of course it's easier to remember, but when we are all frazzled and dysregulated, thinking of an acronym, like relying on an acronym can actually be pretty helpful. Mm-hmm. So the one I'm going to describe is called GIVE.
Okay. Easy.
Well,
easy to remember. Give.
Yeah. And GIVE in particular is all about keeping the relationship. So now that Rocket...
Wait, it's called Give, but it's about keeping?
Well, generally it's about... These are 4 guidelines for keeping a relationship strong, keeping a relationship boundaried now that you found it. Now that you found love, this is what you do so
with
Rocket
it.
has, in addition to, by the way, spoiler, Groot now being baby Groot, Rocket now has this band of friends. How can Rocket keep those friends? So the acronym is GIVE. I'll start with G. Okay. G stands for be gentle. No attacks, no threats.
Yeah. That's not in any way Rocket. Okay.
This one's hard, but it means from the beginning, try to be nice, try to be respectful. No verbal or physical attacks, no hitting, no clenching fists. I mean, this is very, very specific.
And you're actually describing the antithesis of
this is work. Yeah, this will be work for him.
Okay.
And no threats, right? So try not to be manipulative. Try not to threaten that you'll harm the other person or that you'll harm yourself. Try to stay in the difficulty of those emotions if you feel that way. And within the be gentle component, it actually says here, no sneering, no smirking, no eye rolling, no sucking teeth.
This is his resting face. Okay.
Yeah. It also means no walking away, no getting fed up. You know how Rocket sort of has that exasperated giving up. Nope, you don't do that. You stay with the person.
Okay.
Okay. So the I is act interested. Act interested. Listen.
So the act is.
It's not play act.
The act is in parentheses there because I does not act does not begin with
interested.
I.
Yeah, it's interested.
Interested.
Act interested.
Okay.
Appear interested in the other person. Listen to them. Make eye contact. Lean toward them. This is really about communicating effectively with your posture, your body, your expressions, right?
Yeah.
V is validate. So validate with words and with actions. Try to see the other person's perspective on something.
Okay.
We actually kind of see this happen with Rocket in a future film. We don't quite yet see. I'd say.
Well, he's getting there.
I'd say with Groot.
Yeah.
I'd say with Groot, he does have a strong enough relationship to not only give validation but get it.
Okay.
And then finally, E. Easy manner. Try to access a little humor. Smile. Ease the person along. Be lighthearted. This is actually probably the most, I'd say could be the most effective thing for Rocket. Use a soft sell over a hard sell. So get rid of the attitude and the superiority and just try to have an approach of a softness, again, a gentleness, an easy manner. Now, this is just one of many coping strategies for building and keeping relationships and trying to be boundaried.
Yeah.
But you'll notice that one of the most important parts of the GIVE acronym is that getting along piece. How do I get along with others? How do I make my relationships, matter to me? And like, obviously, fundamentally, how do I not destroy it?
All right. I'm going to ask you to take a note and I will do the same thing, but just so that we are both on top of it, take a note. And as we go forward with specifically Rocket's relationships in future movies, let's see if he's actually applying any of these to his relationships, because I can't talk about it too much, but I can't really talk about it at all until we see it. I can't talk about it at all, but I fear that maybe he's not applying any of this work.
Probably not. But let's go back to the double emotions that we've talked about before. The secondary emotion that we're seeing from him, pretty much most of the movie, is what? Anger, frustration, intolerance,
sarcasm.
Yeah. But what's underneath that is sadness, pain. He's been harmed. He's in this protective mode. And I think that those are the things that we start to see at the end of the movie. What happens if he opens up? What happens if he eases into a connection with people? What's important here is that he can still be authentic about it. He doesn't have to be fake.
No. I mean, look, this is a little bit of a spoiler for upcoming movies, and I don't really want to spend any time talking about it, but at least not yet. But of all the Guardians of the Galaxy, Rocket is the one that has a tendency to split off from the rest of the group. So he'll often find another partner to go do things with, or whatever. Yeah. So I fear that some of the things that are in that list of give or gave, if you decide to apply the word act in front of interest, I think I fear that maybe he wasn't told about these things and therefore is not actually doing any of them because he going forward seems to be the least interested in maintaining the family dynamic, although you do get a sense that he would be lost without them. Like he just didn't.
Yeah. And what we see even in this film is that, unlike I think any other character, he has a willingness to be present and pretty direct with the state of things, right? He doesn't fall into a withdrawn sort of inaccessible emotion. He doesn't, when things get tough, he actually he's in a way he's incredibly present. He's incredibly solution oriented.
Yeah.
He's not very nice about it. He almost pushes people to move forward. But there is that sort of direct attack. He's an attacker, and he does that when he problem solves and when he deals with difficult emotions. he just goes for it. And I think in some ways that can be pretty enlightening. That can be a relief for people who get stuck in their emotions and they're dysregulated and they don't do anything.
Right. So overall, now having discussed it, this movie remains in your top 3. You're now fully invested in these characters, and you want to see how they progress or not going forward.
Yeah, I'd say that it's still in my top 3.
Yeah.
Where would you put this film?
It ranks highly for me, but I also have a really hard time associating it with the MCU. It's sort of its separate thing. It is tangentially related to the MCU because it involves an Infinity Stone, but it's really hard to say that this sci-fi romp is in any way part of what we have been seeing over the course of 2 phases. So it's its own little thing that will become more thoroughly woven into the fabric of the MCU.
Sure, it still feels like a side quest.
It's very much a side quest. And so, it ranks really highly for me as an enjoyable film, but not necessarily as like a quintessential part of the MCU that we are currently studying, if that makes sense.
That's fair. It does.
Up to this point, the closest we've been to space is Tony Stark leaving the atmosphere momentarily to destroy a spaceship.
Well, we've been to Asgard and we know about the 9 realms, and who are the people that came down to Earth? Earth was invaded by
the Chitauri.
Thor,
which we see in very brief moments on like asteroids and stuff. But yes, and
but
Asgard,
I see what you say. This expands the narrative universe in that now we're dealing with other places that have little to do with Earth.
Yeah, and I wouldn't necessarily say Asgard is space. It's like another realm. It's another realm, and that story still took place on Earth. And so I mean, we've been to other sort of realms and worlds, but like this is straight up space. This is what you love. This is spaceships.
Yeah, talking raccoons, a tree branch.
Yeah.
Sure.
If there were like if there were a straight up robot in there, we've got Nebula, which I feel like it's better to talk about her in an upcoming, because here the bulk of what we see is that she is insanely jealous of her other sister, of Gamora.
Yeah.
And she's the one who's much more likely to be a villain because she needs to win her reputation with her father and the love and the affection that Gamora just sort of seems to naturally receive.
Yeah.
But I feel like we're going to get a whole lot more of Nebula going forward, so we'll hold her. So until next time, Drea, when we're going to cover the Avengers Age of Ultron, there's where you get your big robot. Why don't you tell the good folks where they can find you online?
I can be found online on my website, drdreapsychology.com, and on social media with the handle @ArkhamAsylumDoc.
You can find me. I am @bward028 on Twitter and _Ward028 on Instagram. You can follow us both on Twitter @Arkham Sessions or on Instagram @The Arkham Sessions. Be sure to follow our family over at Fanbase Press. Come find us on Facebook, and of course, join Patreon, where you can get early access to these podcasts, plus occasional longer or deleted scenes. You can also get videos and some Batman Beyond stuff. It's all right there on Patreon. I'd like to thank our patrons who have made this episode possible. We've got Weffy, Christopher Bauer, Eric O'Sullivan, Zach Neal, Zachary Hunter, Michael Pruitt, Dr. Girlfriend, Maria Diego, Nick Gilbert, my father, Carl Ward, Jay Griffin Hughes, Dr. Jerome Anderson, John Henry, and of course our good friend Todd Stashwick. Until next time, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
The Arkham Sessions.
said it yourself, bitch. We're the Guardians of the Galaxy.